So next up is Cindy Duff and Amanda Cluis on building resilience. Resilience is so important. Uh, Amanda was talking about the Holmes race test, and for those of you who are just joining us now, please, and after this conference tomorrow or sometime this month, uh, re replay back the Amanda's workshop on understanding stress and serenity strategies. And she talks about the Holmes race test. It's a test that you can do that will assess your stress levels. And for missionaries, right? For here in the United States, most of us, when you take the test, if you are about 200, that means it's serious. You need to go get help. You need to get counseling. You need to lessen your stress levels. A score of 200 here in the United States, it's actually going to you can expect a mental, emotional, and physical breakdown in the next 1 year. But missionaries who has high resilience before leaving to go to the field, they're already at 300. And while in the field, they're at 600 to 800, and coming back, a lot of them come back at 1,000 to 1,200. So our services actually helps them to bring down that stress. And but a big part of being able to withstand difficulties and challenges in life is building up your resilience. Cindy Duff and Amanda are going to talk about resilience, whether you're a missionary going overseas or you're here in the United States. Resilience will help you to uh, to deflect the stress levels in your life. So without further ado, I want to present to you back. I want to present back to you Amanda and Cindy Duff.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this online conference put on by Compass Ministries. We're going to be talking about a series of topics on the issues of mental health and faith. And today you're going to be with myself and Cindy Duff. We are both here with Compass Ministries, which is a ministry that Cindy started in 2011 that has served missionaries and their families around the world. We offer debriefings, counseling, coaching at really low cost or free. And Cindy started this ministry all by herself many years ago and now has a whole team. And so, Cindy, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Amanda.
Cindy comes to us with many years of counseling experience, and she's an educator, a great speaker, and personally, she's one of my mentors. She's a mom of 4 adult children, and she's really been such an inspiration to me. I'm the clinical director of Compass Ministries. My name is Amanda Cluis. I'm a licensed counselor and also a mom of 4 kids. And so I'm really excited about this topic today that we're going to be discussing about the question of building resilience. And so, Cindy, can you tell us why is building resilience important?
Well, resilience is important because without it, we can't recover from difficulties in life. And all of us experience difficulties, don't we?
Absolutely. And this is an important topic, not only for our missionaries and their families, the missions community, but this is something that's important for all people as we're all encountering difficulties and struggles in life, no matter where we are and what we're doing. So tell us, what is resilience?
There. Well, resilience is a topic that has been studied by the U.S. military and by U.S. NGOs that do humanitarian work around the world. And there's an awful lot of really good research out there. And this, what we're doing today is built upon that research. I think it is important to mention before I define resilience is to let people know that all of this research is correlational research, meaning that there's a relationship between the things we're going to talk about and high resilience. But correlation does not prove causation. We can't really do controlled experiments on human beings for ethical reasons. It can't harm human beings. So, but the correlations between the things we're going to talk about and high resilience is very strong. And so in the absence of any other data that we can use, we're going to move forward with this tentatively, that this is what causes resilience, and give us some hints on how we can build resilience. So that's why we're doing this. Now, what is resilience? Well, resilience is inner strength that allows a person to bounce back after trauma, extreme stress, and difficulties in their life. And all of us have some resilience. Some people have really high resilience, but even people with really high resilience have a breaking point. So it doesn't mean if someone has high resilience that, they won't ever burn out or break or any of those things.
Mm-hmm. I was looking in my play therapy room and found one of my toys that I think is a great representation of what resilience is. It's the ability to bend and flex and stretch through difficult circumstances. And, some of the research that I've read on resilience has looked at prisoners of war, and what helps those who survived well and came out of it. What characteristics do they show, and did they really have in those very difficult circumstances? And so I know that some of the research is drawn upon those types of correlational studies. So, yeah. Cindy, tell us, why do missionaries specifically need to develop resilience?
Well, I really think you should answer that because you're the one who's been a missionary, but I have worked with missionaries for over a decade. And the stories that I've heard has shown me that many missionaries deal with much more stress and many more traumatic experiences than people who live in the United States generally experience.
That's true with my experience. My family and we lived in Kyrgyzstan for many years, and also in Russia. And as a single woman, I lived in Kenya and China as well. And I can vouch for the fact that, while there are difficulties for people who live in the States, if a person is choosing to live a missionary lifestyle, they're automatically dealing with stressors of moving and changing cultures, functioning in other languages, leaving their support systems. And then in addition to that, a lot of these folks are choosing to go to difficult places, unreached people groups, remote villages. And so traumatic events are more likely to occur in those situations where there's war, famine, food insecurity, things like that. Seeing death more
and happening in an environment without having any of their social supports many times.
Yes. And so
now, is it anecdotal, or do we have any concrete evidence that missionaries actually experience more stress than U.S. people?
So the Holmes Race Scale has been used to evaluate the stress levels that people endure, and it considers things like changing jobs, moving, losing a loved one, and there's a whole list and numerical scale that is used with that. And the average person in America usually scores about a 200 for the amount of stress they encounter in a year. The average missionary functions at about a 600, though many are way higher than that. When I was on the field and took this test, I scored at a 1200. And so the research shows that anything over a 200 greatly increases the risk of developing a physical illness or a mental health condition that's quite serious due to those elevated stress levels. So missionaries are innately dealing with high stress situations, not all the time, but frequently at a higher.
And yet they live under these very high levels that here in the United States would predict physical breakdown or mental health problems. And yet missionaries just continue on with, and why is that?
Well, that's exactly what resilience is, because a lot of people who have strong resilience choose to go to the mission field. They understand, okay, I can handle this with God's help, of course, and God's leading. But a lot of them innately have some of these real strengths of resilience that we're going to talk about and get into, but that there's also room that these things need to be developed as well in the face of difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So Cindy, can you tell us a little bit about what characterizes people with high resilience?
Well, yes. I mean, if it really is going to make that big of a difference in people, it's important for us to know what characteristics are characteristics of people who have high resilience. Now, the research has shown that there is basically a list of character traits and character habits, personality traits and character habits that correlate highly with high resilience. And so everybody shows these traits in some situations. But when we talk about a personality trait, we're talking about something that is true about them in many situations over a long period of time, not just a short period of time. So it's important to remember this. This needs to be a long-term habit of personality. Of course, personality is the way that we interact with other people and the way that we interact with ourselves. So these are personality traits that people with high resilience tend to have. So let's just go through each one of them and just talk about them briefly. People with high resilience tend to enjoy change and enjoy facing challenges. Not everybody likes change. Some people prefer to keep everything exactly the same. People with high resilience don't mind change. They actually embrace it. And obviously, people who go into mission work are going to be the kind of personalities that embrace change. Otherwise, they would leave their country of origin and go somewhere else, right? People with high resilience are flexible in their thinking and problem solving. We're going to talk about this more at the end of our presentation, but some people have a tendency to have just one way of looking at things. And that can lead to kind of rigid thinking and rigid problem solving, where there's only one way to attack this problem, only one way to solve it. And highly resilient people are people who have multiple ways of looking at a problem, multiple ways of approaching their problems. Strong sense of humor. There's lots of research that shows strong sense of humor leads to good mental health, right? And high resilience is one of those things, characteristics of good mental health. A faith in God's sovereignty and goodness. Now, the secular research doesn't call it that. The secular research calls it optimism about the world or positivity. But for those of us that believe in Jesus, our optimism about the future and our positivity about life comes from our faith that God is sovereign and that he's good. And we have many promises from God that nothing takes him by surprise, that he is in control, and that he can cause all things, even evil things, to be for our good and for his glory. So we're going to talk about that more also. Highly resilient people are goal-oriented, and they have a life purpose. And obviously, missionaries have a sense of call, so that's a sense of life purpose. But even non-missionaries, if you're goal-oriented and you have a sense of purpose for your life, then that leads to higher resilience. Being organized and a planner. Now, you don't have to have all these characteristics to have high resilience. So if you have ADHD, it doesn't preclude you from having high resilience. But people who have high resilience tend to be more organized and be planners, and we'll see why later in our presentation. Being a leader helps with resilience, probably because you feel like you have more control in a situation if you're the leader, but that's just a guess. We don't really know. But being a leader is correlated to higher resilience. Extroversion. And of all the things we're talking about today, this is one of the things that you really can't change about yourself. We are born either extroverted or introverted to various degrees. And people who are extremely introverted will have lower levels of resilience than people who are extremely extroverted. This may be because extroversion leads to higher degrees of social support, more people around us. And you see at the bottom of the list there, social support is correlated to high resilience. For whatever reason, people who are extroverted have more resilience. Agreeableness, someone who gets along with other people and isn't contentious. Conscientiousness and responsibility, that goes along with being organized and a planner, but that leads to more resilience. Emotional stability, what that means not that your emotions are always the same, but that as your emotions change, your behavior doesn't change much. That's what emotional stability means. That you can stay the same regardless of what kind of emotional strain you're under. Self-confidence, most people know what that means. Self-confident people have higher resilience, but also people with high self-efficacy. And what that means is that whatever task I'm trying to do, I feel as though I have the ability to be successful at it. And if you're doing something that you feel you have the skills and the resources needed to be successful at it, then you will have more resilience as you face problems along the way with that project. A realistic self-appraisal. People with high resilience know what their limits are and know when to call in help or know when to delegate to someone else something that they are not good at. Strong family bonds, or if a person is single, strong team cohesion correlates to high resilience. We rely on each other. And self-compassion, the ability to forgive yourself for failures in the past or even in the present. If we're constantly condemning ourselves, then that undermines the emotional strength we need to bounce back from difficult things. Mindfulness, we're going to talk more about this later on, but mindfulness is being present in the moment and aware of what's going on. And in babies, resilience is correlated to having an easy temperament. So the 3 temperaments for babies are easy, difficult, and slow to warm up. If you have a difficult baby, you know what I'm talking about. And slow to warm up. If you have a slow to warm up baby who's reluctant to meet new people and engage with new people, that's another personality type. Well, babies with an easy temperament tend to have more resilience in the face of stress and difficulty. And of course, social support, which a lot of these things lead to social support.
So Cindy, as I'm looking at this list, I'm reminded of some of the ways I noticed I grew from before we went to the mission field to where we were after that experience. Flexible and thinking is a huge one. I think I entered the mission field experience like with probably pretty rigid thinking but was forced to see things from different perspectives, forced to let go of, the right way of doing things. Got my mind blown a couple of times by how flexible my thinking had to become. But that's a testimony that these things can be developed and grown. Another example that comes to mind is, being organized and planner. We were in a situation where we were faced with civil war and revolutions. And so once we made a contingency plan, which I had never had to do in America, but once we had that, my anxiety levels went down to a degree because I knew what we were supposed to do. And that increased my resilience to live and keep taking care of the family and doing our ministry in the midst of highly stressful situation. Just knowing that we had a plan really helped. And that was something else I had no experience with before we left, but grew in that area. So I can think of ways that I had to build resilience in certain areas that I was weak in right at the beginning.
Right.
So how do we know if in ourselves we have these qualities, or if we're on a team situation, if members of our team have these qualities? And secondly, is there a way to measure resilience?
Well, yes, there is. There are actually 3 well documented and reliable ways of measuring resilience in a person's personality. We have the Connor-Davis resilience scale, the CD-RISC, which has been used for quite some time and has been shown to be very reliable. The dispositional research scale and the resilience scale for adults. And these are instruments for measuring that can be purchased by mental health professionals and then used in order to find out where areas that I'm strong in and where are areas that I'm weak in that correlate to resilience, particularly if I'm about to go into a high stress situation. It's good to know. It is important to note, though, that a low score in a resilience scale does not disqualify someone for mission work or stressful work, but it does let team leaders and member care workers and mission agencies know who might need extra support when things get hard, who might need a check-in periodically, and who the team might need to rally around if something hard happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just good to know before you go into a stressful situation, whether you're someone who is high resilience or low resilience, so that measures can be taken.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important point that you're making, that a low score of resilience, or looking at a list of resilience traits and noticing, hey, these are really hard for you. Maybe you're not strong in a lot of these. That's not a reason to not serve the Lord or follow your faith and serve the Lord overseas. These things can be strengthened. I've worked with a number of couples where, let's say, that one spouse is very strong in resilience traits and one spouse isn't. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a recipe for disaster. It just means they might need to be aware of where those weak spots are and support one another in those areas, because a lot of these skills can be developed. So that's a point of encouragement, and in a team aspect, that we can help one another in those weaker areas. So what if I don't have these qualities? How can we develop more resilience?
Well, yes. And my recommendation would be to look through the list and find 2 or 3 that you're especially weak in your own self-assessment, and then develop a plan for how to grow in those areas. Practicing, if you're not a planner, then you can learn to become a planner. If you don't have much social support, then rally friends around, start building relationships, those kinds of things. I'm looking at the list here. And if your, awareness of God's sovereignty and goodness around you is low and is causing you to be pessimistic about the future, then memorize some verses and do some meditation on what the Bible tells us God is like, so that your faith in him can grow and your optimism can develop. Learn emotional stability. Learn how to control your emotions so that your behaviors you don't fly off the handle easily, or those kinds of things, so that your behaviors can be more predictable around others. Take a look at your self-appraisal. Am I being overly optimistic that I can handle everything? Sit down and do a really, come to Jesus moment with yourself and say, well, you know what? I'm trying to do some things that I am not really good at. And then pull in people onto your team with you to help you to do that. Learning to be forgiving of yourself, forgiving others. That's a muscle we can exercise and learn to forgive more readily and easily.
Cindy, you keep mentioning this aspect of doing this in a community, like that we might need people outside of ourselves to help us grow in resilience, like a pastor or a friend, social network, maybe family members to speak into us, to ask us, how are we doing with these things?
Growth group, being a part of a discipleship group where you give each other loving but truthful feedback. Can help us become more aware of who we are and what our strengths are and our weaknesses. And we can grow by being around other people who are modeling for us some of these characteristics that we don't have.
And there's also a role if somebody doesn't have somebody in their life who can naturally fit that role for them. Compass Ministries has coaches and counselors who can help on this journey of building resilience. So that's also another option that's out there for our missionaries and their families.
Good point. Well, besides growing in those personality traits, we also need to grow in self-awareness. And this is where feedback from a community of faith can help us and become more aware. But there are 3 main areas that the research shows it's important to be aware of. One is to be aware of our thoughts. A lot of times we have thoughts rolling around in the back of our head that we're not even aware are there, but they're still affecting us, our emotions and our energy level. And then there's awareness of our weaknesses, and then awareness of our bodies. So let's go back to awareness of thoughts. It's important to ask ourselves, am I thinking a lot about past failures? Is it going around and around and around? Oh, I regret doing that. I wish I hadn't done that. It's going round and round. Catch yourself thinking about it a lot. Or do you find yourself worrying about the future a lot? Round and round and round, the same thought, the same worry. And we call this rumination when somebody does this. And rumination uses up a lot of emotional energy. And the thing is, we might not even be aware we're doing it. We're busy doing other things. And in the back of our mind, these thoughts are going around and around and around. And so in order to become more resilient, we need to become more aware of the thoughts that are in the back of our mind. We need to pull them to the front. We need to become aware of them. And then we need to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. If it's not true, for instance, if we're feeling condemned about something from the past that we have put under the blood of Christ, then it's not true that we're condemned. There is therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. So that's not true. So if it's not true, then we need to take it captive and put it under the truth that it's not true. If it hasn't happened yet, then it's not true in your life. And so why worry about something that hasn't happened yet? Bring it captive to the obedience of Christ. Leave it with him. Trust him with it. So refuse worry and choose faith. That's what Jesus told us to do. He said, do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough evil of its own. Today has enough evil of its own. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And Jesus says, refuse to worry and rebuke Satan's accusations. If he is throwing darts at you saying you're not worthy, you're not capable, you're condemned, refuse that and accept forgiveness that God is offering you. Another is awareness of weaknesses. Learn how to compensate for your areas of weakness. I have a huge weakness. I have no sense of time passing. It will seem to me like 10 minutes have passed and hours can go by, particularly when I'm involved in doing something. And I have missed so many appointments because of that. I've stood people up. And so I've had to learn to compensate for that. So I write every single thing I'm going to do, no matter how mundane, into my calendar. And I set alarms on my clock on my calendar to go off 15 minutes before every appointment. And that is how I compensate for this weakness. So all of us need to know, what are our weaknesses and what do we need to do to compensate for it? Ask for help when needed. But it is important when you identify weaknesses, and we all have them, refuse to compare yourself to someone else. God has made you the way you are for a reason. And you can do things that other people cannot do because of how God made you. But especially refuse to compare your weakness to someone else's strength. That will completely undermine your self-confidence and your self-efficacy, which are two things that are needed for resilience. And show grace to yourself and to others. And then awareness of your body. Learn to practice relaxation through the day. Stop several times a day and do stretches and deep breaths and try to get your body to relax. Be aware of where in your body you carry stress. So I carry stress here at the top of my shoulders. And so when I start to feel that tightening, I stop, I do special stretches, I'll do some deep breathing in order to get the stress out of my body. If you don't catch stress early, then it can become a major physical issue. Stress in your body can cause, backaches, migraines, neck pain. It can cause stomach problems, breathing problems. So there's just a lot of long-term physical problems that can happen if you have not been staying on top of stress that's building up in your body. And some of the things you can do is you can change your workload, change your position, You can practice progressive muscle relaxation. If you Google that online, you'll see some scripts of how to do that progressively, going through your body, relaxing different muscle groups. Just one thing, though, that I would like to mention, if you're Googling relaxation practices online, some of what would come up will be New Age practices, Eastern mystical practices. And as Christians, we want to stay away from that. But you can kind of take some of those practices and then replace the Eastern mysticism with prayer, contemplative prayer to God, or meditation on a verse of scripture that will help you trust God and be more relaxed. So these are some ways of growing in self-awareness of your thoughts, your weaknesses, and your body.
Well, Cindy, as you're talking about building resilience through self-awareness, so many spiritual disciplines come to mind as a part of this process. And that's where faith and mental health really intersect. I mean, when we're talking about our thoughts, we're talking about anxiety and taking thoughts captive to Christ and forgiving ourselves. Those are spiritual disciplines. They don't just happen easily. They take work to strengthen the spiritual discipline aspect. I mean, everywhere I'm seeing grace. We need to extend grace to ourselves and to others. This in the middle, the area of weaknesses, learning to compensate for areas of our weakness takes humility, to be honest about where our weaknesses are. We have to let go of pride and embrace a humble attitude, inviting others in to say, hey, where do you see that I'm weak, and how can we help one another? I need your help. Asking for help is really difficult, but one of the key things in the missionary lifestyle, I know when we first went to the field, we were told to be more needy, because that sense of humility was going to be endearing to the locals, and also it built strengths, relationships with our team. It was important. And so we did. We had to be more honest about where our needs were, and so that we could then compensate for these areas of weakness. That's where the team aspect can be really important, not only to fill in the gaps. I'm weak in this area, so somebody else can help, but also to grow together as a team, as a community of Christ, where we can strengthen one another. Be iron sharpening iron to grow, but it takes a lot of humility.
And someone who's not on a team, a ministry team, can seek that out in their church. They can seek out an accountability partner who will tell them the truth that other people are too polite to tell them.
Yes.
And it can be in a growth group, which works on spiritual disciplines and this kind of thing. So you're talking about growth. So is it true that trauma, I mean, when we think of trauma, really bad things that can happen, or prolonged stress that can break down the body, can this really be opportunities for growth in our lives?
It seems counterintuitive, but yes, these can be key moments to grow. Now we have choice. We can either crumble underneath the weight of traumatic experiences and prolonged stress, or we can choose to grow through it. And that's what we want to encourage our listeners today, to see these difficulties not as some sin took place and that's why I'm suffering, or that God's not good and that's why I'm suffering, or I'm just a failure and that's why I'm suffering. No, let's turn all that on our head and look at these as opportunities for growth. And we can grow through this if one of the key things is if we believe that there is meaning in a difficulty, if we can find a sense of purpose and meaning, seeing the Lord through the difficulty, growing in knowledge of ourselves through the difficulty, that can be really key. Another way that we can grow is that relationships can often be strengthened through difficult times. I know when we were experiencing difficulty on the field, we had to lean into our team and into our family relationships. Now, some relationships get really stressed, but there are often choices, not always, but often choices in how you're going to engage relationships in difficult times. There's also history. When you go through adversity, it gives you confidence that you can handle the next adversity. That's a key difference between adults and kids. Kids haven't experienced a lot, so they don't know. Everything's new. But as an adult, when you go through difficulties and suffering, it gives you confidence that, like, okay, I can get through this, or the Lord got me through the last one and I can get through this next one. So it gives you confidence to get through adversity. And it can give you renewed appreciation for life and commitment to your own spiritual values and things like that. I know that when I lost loved ones on the field, and that gave me a personal new appreciation for life. That suffering renewed my passion to take advantage of each day being a gift. Another example for me, I had terrible back pain at one point and had to undergo surgery. After that experience, almost every day I wake up and say, thank you, Lord, that I'm not in pain. If I hadn't had that difficulty, I wouldn't have that appreciation. Like, you just take it for granted. But these difficult traumatic experiences and prolonged stress can really be opportunities for growth. But here's kind of a tricky point for a lot of people, our biblical theology of suffering. We often, as believers, feel like if I'm serving God, if I'm being faithful to go to the mission field or to be a part of a ministry here in the States, that God's going to bless me, protect me, and do all the things that I expect him to. Folks, that's just not true. And that was a hard lesson I had to learn on the field. I saw missionaries' children die. Hard things that I could not wrap my head around. Being faithful to God is not a guarantee that you are going to experience prosperity and health and life, or even a fruitful ministry. We have to be faithful to God no matter what's happening. And we can express to God our disappointments, but he is not the one who is leading us. Well, we're going to talk about the sources of evil and suffering in this world. And these are important for us to think through because it affects our perspective about difficulties. Satan
I think it's important to notice that word tacit, that this belief that many of us have, we don't know really that we have it.
Yes.
We just
I didn't know it.
Right. Until something happens that causes you to be disappointed in God.
Yes.
And then you realize, oh, I was expecting blessing from God and he would not allow any suffering in my life. And that's when we realize that my theology of suffering is inadequate to the reality of the way things are.
Yes. And Jesus told us to expect suffering in this world, but he said, I give you peace in the midst of it. He doesn't say I'm going to remove you from it. He says, I'm going to give you peace in the midst of it, and don't let your hearts be troubled. So we have to really grapple with that as we're entering into scenarios that are probably going to expose us to traumatic events and stressful situations. So Cindy, can you maybe talk to us about some of the sources of evil and suffering in the world that we encounter?
Well, they're listed on the slide here, but yes, I mean, generally speaking, obviously there is an evil presence in the world, Satan, but most of the evil I think that we see in the world comes either from our own sinful choices or other people's sinful choices. But we also have a lot of suffering that's related to the degeneration of our biology and the world due to the fall. You know, lately we've been seeing a lot of landslides in Asia, thousands and thousands of people dying because of mudslides from rain. And it's the degeneration of our planet's, weather systems is causing suffering there. And that's due to the fall. Things are not in balance the way God created them in the world, and that causes suffering. But I think it is important to note that there are 8 billion people on the planet making decisions, and that God usually allows those decisions to stand because God gave us free will to be free agents. And so that means God is allowing a lot of things to happen that is not his will. He's allowing it to happen because he decided to give us free will. And I know that's a challenging concept, particularly when we look at the sovereignty of God. But God has allocated some sovereignty to these 8 billion people. And a lot of the suffering we see in the world is because of that. And of course, God allows us to have free will so that we can choose him and have a genuine relationship with him. But in the face of all of that, of these different agents that cause suffering and evil in the world, God has given us the promise that he causes everything, even evil, to work together for our good and for his glory, that he's powerful enough to turn even evil into good in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's suffering that happens, not from God's hand, but from other agency. But sometimes we do suffer from God's hand, that it's God's plan for us to suffer, and he has reasons for it. He might ask us to suffer so that we can grow and mature emotionally or spiritually. We see this in Romans 5. He might ask us to suffer so that he can be glorified by our devotion and faithfulness. That was the situation with Job.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he asks us to suffer so that others can benefit from our sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what we see in the lives of missionaries a lot. They go through a lot of suffering, but it's for the benefit of the people who do not yet know Christ, that God asks them to endure suffering for the benefit of these other people.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to point out an interesting aspect. Even if we're making a point to see trauma and stressful moments as opportunities for growth, it doesn't negate the fact that we have to be honest about the feelings that come with it, the loss, the grieving. Like, for example, we are in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and we've recently endured some hurricanes. There is tremendous suffering. One of my relatives lost their home. There's been so much loss, people impacted so in such difficult ways by these storms. And yet it's a growth moment. The communities are coming together. We're seeing God at work. So both exist at the same time. We have to grieve. We have to be honest with how devastating this event was. And at the same time, we can also see the growth opportunities and grow through it with community and relationships and things like that. So both can coexist. When we're seeing it as, okay, I can grow through this, it doesn't negate that we have to be honest about the hardship that we experience.
And we don't want to be Job's friends, right?
Right.
And telling people, oh, it's not that big a deal, get over it, trust God. We don't want to give easy answers. We want to sit with people in their anguish.
Yeah.
We want to sit with people in their anguish, but we also want to eventually help them analyze,
Yes.
that, they can have faith in God in the situation, and that they can trust that God has a good plan, even though it's excruciating.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's one other way to build resilience, and that's to develop active coping strategies. So, shall we look at those, Amanda?
Yes. Let's take a look at what can we do to actively build these areas of resilience, areas that we might have some weaknesses in. We want folks to leave this workshop having very practical steps that they can take to shore up those aspects that are weakened. So we've already provided a list previously of characteristics of resilient people, but let's take a look at some active coping strategies.
Okay. Well, you already talked about this, but developing contingency plans and then forget about the thing you're worried about, right? It hasn't happened yet. You've made a contingency plan, have a plan, and then live in the moment. And that is a very healthy way to live, to be focused on the present. That way we don't miss the beautiful things that are happening right in front of us. We don't miss the optimistic things that we see, the new trends that are moving. If we are instead focused on the future and what horrible thing could happen, we're missing what God's blessings are in the moment. So live in the moment. Stay current in processing your grief. A lot of people avoid grief. They get busy distracting themselves when they've had a loss, instead of allowing the pain of that loss to wash over them. And grieving a loss is the process God has given us to deal with it and to put it in the past. As long as we avoid grief, then it continues to be a present reality because we haven't processed it and we haven't allowed it to wash over us and go into the past. So it's important to stay current. If we let loss after loss after loss after loss build up, and we don't acknowledge the losses and the pain we feel because of it, and allow ourselves to grieve it, then it starts to build up. And then that saps our emotional energy. Unprocessed grief saps our emotional energy, and it reduces our resilience when the next thing happens. So very important to stay current in processing grief.
Mm.
One of the things that I say to people who've had a lot of losses and who feel like, oh, if I allow myself to feel this, it'll overwhelm me and I won't be able to function. So what I have suggested for a lot of people is that they set an appointment with grief every week, couple of hours that they set aside where they sit down and they allow themselves to think about what has been lost, allow that wave of grief to roll over them and to feel the pain of it. And then when that 2 hours is done, pack it up, put it away and say, well, next week I'll come back here, until when they come back to process the grief, it no longer is overwhelming.
That's a great idea. It's a very helpful tip, practical.
But we need to stay current and not let it pile up. Another is increasing your positivity. Count your blessings. There's an old hymn and it sounds trite, but it actually works. It increases your optimism and positivity, which is a major characteristic of resilient people. So count your blessings. Take a look at the little things even that God is doing in your life, the beauty that God gives you in your life. Gratitude journal is a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm. I just started a new gratitude journal recently, and it has been really helpful to maintain optimism and to build some of those resilience characteristics. Because I'm a type of person, at the end of the day, I kind of focus on all the things that went wrong or what I didn't accomplish. But I'm telling you, it actually works. Writing down, thinking back through my day and thanking God for the hard things, the good things, and everything in between, and remembering what happened through the day has been really good to firm up that aspect of gratitude in my own heart. So that's something I'm actively trying to work on through your suggestion of a gratitude journal.
Yeah, and I would challenge everybody to write down 10 things that they're grateful for in that day that are different than any others you've written down any other day.
Mm-hmm.
10 things, and it could be as small as the sparkling dew on the grass outside your window. And it was just something pretty that caught your eye and gave you pleasure to look at it. And you can be grateful for that. That's a gift from God as well. Or a friend who called you, or that really good steak that turned out well when you cooked it. You know, just being grateful for the little things in life can help build that positivity and optimism. Mm. Another is mindfulness habits. We've talked about this a lot when we talked about self-awareness, but mindfulness habits, being aware of how you're feeling, what's going on around you, staying in the moment instead of being lost in your head somewhere, right?
I want to put in a plug for,
yeah.
we're going to offer another workshop on stress management. Mindfulness is going to be a part of that. So if that's a topic that's interesting to any of our listeners, then stay tuned for another workshop on stress specifically.
Okay. And avoid rumination. We talked about this already, but you know, if you're going to be mindful, then you won't be ruminating. Ruminating is that over and over and over again in the back of your head. So refuse to worry, Jesus said. Sufficient to the day is the evil of thereof. Promote flexible thinking. Avoid rigid ways of interpreting life.
So, Cindy, you've given us some really practical tips you've helped us understand what resilience is and why it's important. You've given us really practical tips on how to assess if we have these resiliency traits in us, and oh no, what do we do if we don't have them? We can strengthen them using some of those coping strategies, inviting others into the process so they can help us grow in awareness and firming up these things. So I'm leaving with a sense of hopefulness that all of us can grow in resilience based on what you shared with us.
Well, amen. May the Lord make it so in each of us.
Yes, absolutely. And for those who are in our audience who need help in this process of growing and journeying through traumatic events, difficulties, please know that Compass Ministries is out there for missionaries and their families. We offer coaching, counseling, debriefing services, a variety of services. If you're struggling and you need support along the way, please check out compass-ministries.net and reach out for services today. We would love to help you, and thank you for joining us for this workshop today. And thank you for your service to the Lord. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Amanda and Cindy, for building resilience. It kind of reminded me of the blog that I just wrote about 2 weeks ago on the gratefulness, how it heals. There's a study done, I think it was in this psychiatry journal, on soldiers that were coming back from the battlefield, and those who um, uh, eh, suffering PTSD, and those who have come back, seeing, having a grateful heart, actually became more resilient and bounced back real quickly from their PTSD. So there's something to that. And for many missionaries and missionary kids, a lot of them have dealt with traumas, and some of them have had PTSD. And for all of us that are here in the United States, in North America, there has been difficulties in life, and a grateful heart actually heals. And so with that, thank you, Amanda and Cindy. And again, I want to remind our listeners, our viewers, that right here is the QR code for donations. Please, please, please donate to Compass Ministries and help us to continue helping missionaries and their families thrive, get healing, be restored, recover, so that the gospel of Jesus can be preached throughout the world.